Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu always wanted to be remembered as the man who stood up to Iran. He just didn't expect Iran to stand up, punch back, and start kicking down the walls of his legacy one missile at a time. What began as a theatrical airstrike on Iran's aging nuclear sites has snowballed into a cyber-fueled, drone-laced, region-rattling war. And the only thing more shredded than Israeli air defences, which Iran have undermined yet again with little more than a USB stick, is the illusion, or delusion perhaps would be better, control. Then came Donald Trump, parachuting in overnight with bunker-buster bravado on Iran's nuclear sites, hoping to play the saviour, instead lighting the fuse on an even bigger inferno. This isn't the war Netanyahu planned. What comes next is entirely on him and Trump. But how far matters now spiral beyond Israel and Iran, we can only right now dread to think. But it will be a reckoning they never saw coming, and have very much now asked for. Right, so in what may well go down as one of the most self-destructive acts of idiocy in modern history, Israel's long-anticipated confrontation with Iran has erupted into a full-scale war. Or perhaps more accurately, Benjamin Netanyahu's personal war of legacy has exploded in his face. Triggered by an unprovoked strike on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, as we well know by now, strikes coordinated with, and later, as we've seen overnight, joined by the United States, this conflict has escalated into a sustained Iranian counter-offensive marked by precision and resolve. Contrary to Western and Israeli narratives of a fractured, faltering Islamic Republic, the past week has revealed a digitally and military empowered Iran, guided not by panic but by policy, and very much united against the aggression that has been meted out against them. Their actions demonstrate that this conflict is no longer merely about nuclear capabilities, it's about sovereignty, self-defense, and making Israel pay the highest possible price for its aggression, all the more so now after the equally, if not more stupid actions of Donald Trump. The initial act of war was not Iranian. Israel launched an unprovoked missile attack against Iranian nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, despite those facilities being monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency and having no significant weapons-grade material on site, because there isn't any. Iran, it turns out, had already anticipated this escalation, though, and the targeting of these sites, first by Israel, who didn't have the armaments to make a dent in them anyway, far underground as they are, but just in case the US came in with bunker busters, and therefore in the last few days trucks seemed to be leaving said sites, it would appear removed the enrichment materials, leaving the Israeli and subsequent American attacks to destroy little more than concrete and circuitry. There was no radioactive fallout, no loss of strategic capacity, only confirmation of what Tehran has long argued, that this was never about nuclear non-proliferation. It was about provocation and domination, and all the Western rhetoric about Iran not being allowed a nuclear weapon as a whole load of hot air, when the real aim is regime change. It's always been Netanyahu's goal. The American airstrikes that followed, Donald Trump greenlighting direct military involvement, drove the final nail into the coffin of any plausible deniability. Trump, attempting to pass these attacks off as one and done, preemptive deterrence, has instead embroiled the United States in a rapidly expanding Middle East war, and the response from Tehran was immediate and fierce, and it will not be the last. Iran had declared that every US base in West Asia would be a target if the US attacked, and that the consequences of America's involvement would be everlasting. I have a lot more to say in regards to Trump's attack. There is a lot to unpack here already. We'll cover that in another video later tonight, so look out for that. If Israel believed it could strike Iran without repercussions, though, they clearly underestimated Iran's evolution as a 21st century military power. Iran's cyber capabilities have redefined the battlefield. For example, you might be interested to hear that another facet of Iran's success in evading Israel's interceptor missiles came via Iranian intelligence, who have successfully hacked hundreds of surveillance cameras across Israel, both public and private, including systems linked to municipal security grids and infrastructure. This cyber espionage gave Tehran unprecedented real-time visual access to Israeli movements and allowed for hyper-accurate missile targeting. As a direct result, Iran's missile strikes have become more precise and far more devastating. Israel's missile interception rates have dropped by about 25%, revealing even bigger cracks in the much-touted Iron Dome and Arrow defense systems. Tel Aviv and Washington had long relied on their air defense superiority as a deterrent, and now that deterrent is being sliced to ribbons by Iranian cyber warfare. Air defense is taken out by USB stick, if you will. Every camera that once perhaps served as a watchful eye over Gaza's destruction is now helping Tehran map Israel's vulnerabilities. Thus, we have arrived at the 19th wave now of Iran's Operation True Promise 3. This wasn't a mere volley of warning shots. It was a coordinated multi-wave missile and drone assault designed to overwhelm Israeli air defenses and cripple military infrastructure. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, have fired over 40 ballistic missiles, including the Khorramshahr 4 and, for the first time, the Khyber Shikan, capable of bypassing air defense systems and striking hardened and secure targets. One notable target from yesterday that might have been considered such a hardened target, perhaps, was Israel's Ministry for the Interior, which oversees construction and planning. Illegal settlements would be their remit, therefore, in the West Bank. And I use the word "was" deliberately there, because Israel no longer have a Ministry for the Interior. It now lies in complete and utter ruins. Other targets included the Nevatim and Hatzerim air bases, critical for Israeli Air Force operations. In Beersheba, Iranian missiles struck a major Israeli cyber warfare center. Other strikes hit command and control facilities in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and the Negev, as well as 14 additional military installations. All were strikes designed to degrade Israel's war-making ability at its roots, and they did. Initial reports indicate casualties of between 16 and 23 individuals, with property damage running into the hundreds of millions. But the real cost lies in what's been lost strategically, the illusion of Israeli invulnerability and its monopoly on precision warfare. That's not to dismiss the financial cost to Israel, though, because the financial toll of this war is enormous and rapidly growing. Israel is spending around $300 million daily in its campaign against Iran. That figure doesn't include infrastructure damage or the added cost of increased military deployments. It also doesn't account for the immense economic instability gripping Israel due to air travel disruptions, investment flight, and plunging consumer confidence. The missiles and drones Iran is using are not necessarily expensive to produce, especially when compared to, for example, Israel's billion-dollar defense programs. And of course, Iran has been reputedly building up this arsenal of theirs for years. So this asymmetry we're seeing between the two sides is key. Tehran can afford to continue this for months, maybe even years. Netanyahu's regime, not so much. Making matters even worse for Israel is that Iranian intelligence has reportedly identified, and told Israel this no less, that they've mapped Israeli interceptor missile stockpiles, something Israel is rapidly running out of, and declared them legitimate targets now as well. If these are destroyed, as seems likely given the US attack now, Israel's capacity to defend itself from further barrages will diminish even further. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stated unequivocally that Tehran will not engage in diplomacy with Israel or any state that defends its aggression. Speaking to his European counterparts, the UK, France and Germany, collectively known as the E3, and all of them very pro-Israel as we know, Araghchi condemned their failure to uphold international law. These countries have refused to even condemn Israel's first strike, despite Iran invoking its legal right to self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. All they can bleat is Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, which they don't have anyway, and of course that Israel has the right to defend itself, despite the well-known fact now they attacked first. But one of the most damning aspects of the conflict has been the revelation that Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, was not just sabotaging from afar, but had a deep-rooted operational presence within Iran. As a result of grievous attacks that came from within their own territory, Iranian counterintelligence has uncovered multiple covert Israeli drone production facilities, along with camouflage vehicles used for transporting them, an act of aggression in and of itself as this was. Captured materials included over 200 kilos of explosives, parts for drones, launch equipment, and GPS guidance devices. The scale of infiltration has been staggering, and it prompted a massive crackdown within Iran. But rather than divide the Iranian public, Western leaders believing Iran is fractured and the leaders are hated, these revelations have instead unified a country that was indeed a little bit split, especially after it became evident that Mossad's attacks had not only targeted scientists and soldiers, but civilians too. Religious minority leaders in Iran, including representatives from the Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian and Mandaean communities, have also issued collective public condemnations of the assassination threats against Ayatollah Khomeini, pledging support for Iran's defense against what they unanimously called a Zionist war of regime change. In case it's a bit of a shock to the system that the Iranian regime allows such religious minorities to exist, they very much do. And if there was any doubt that Israel's strategy involves targeting not only enemies but life-saving institutions, it should now be extinguished. Iranian sources have confirmed that Israel deliberately struck Red Crescent ambulances and a hospital in Tehran. This follows the exact same pattern of brutality seen in Gaza, where Israeli bombs have routinely targeted ambulances, hospitals and aid convoys. The global silence over these attacks has been absolutely shameful. No major Western news outlet has condemned this targeting of medical infrastructure. The UN has issued no resolution, so the message is clear. Some war crimes, it seems, are too politically inconvenient to name, especially when the perpetrator is Israel, and they will back them come what may. But Tehran is not isolated in this war either. despite having nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize just yesterday. Bad timing, guys. Pakistan has publicly broken ranks with the US and declared support for Iran. They are a nuclear nation themselves, and they've already said if Iran is hit by a nuke, they will fire one on Israel. Meanwhile, the Houthis in Yemen have announced that any agreement it had with the United States to avoid targeting US vessels in the Red Sea is now null and void following that strike on Iran. We are with Iran, their spokesperson has said, and any American ship or military installation is now a potential target. This spells absolute disaster for US logistics and naval operations in the region. This is bad news for any Gulf state housing a US military base. And with Hezbollah in Lebanon having also said attacks on Iran will prompt them to strike Israel, they've been quiet for some months following those evil pager attacks, along with letting their new president Joseph Aoun try diplomacy via the US to get Israel out of their southern territories. Perhaps this has given them some time to rebuild and regroup, hence their current rhetoric. The potential for this to become a multi-front regional war, therefore, is growing by the day. For years, Netanyahu has painted Iran as an existential threat, warning that it was on the cusp of developing nuclear weapons and plotting genocide, all the things Israel itself has actually done. These warnings were always based on the need to be the biggest regional power and their own paranoia, not in fact. What this war has revealed is that Netanyahu's obsession with Iran was never about national security. It was about power. It was about control. It was about manufacturing a threat large enough to distract from his own domestic failures and criminal investigations. But now that he has had his war, it is spiraling out of control. Israel is bleeding money, losing international sympathy, suffering sustained, humiliating military setbacks. Israelis are fleeing to Cyprus by the thousands, God's chosen people fleeing their promised land. Well, it seems to be God perhaps has deserted them therefore. Netanyahu may have finally succeeded in getting the world to see Iran as more than a pariah, but not in the way he intended. Instead of a broken theocracy, the world is seeing a nation defending itself with unity and clarity and chilling competence. The war between Iran and Israel, now catalyzed by the reckless involvement of the United States, has transformed the region and may continue in not a good way as conflict seems certain to widen. It has exposed the hypocrisy of Western diplomacy, the fragility of Israel's defences, and the resolve of a nation long demonized by the global elite. The strikes by the US may have been intended as a deterrent to take out nuclear research, but instead they have guaranteed a wider, deeper, and longer war. And when the smoke clears, the world may not remember this as the war that stopped a nuclear Iran, but as the war that finally exposed the naked, cynical depravity of the Israeli regime and its enablers in Washington and elsewhere. Netanyahu's war of choice may well become the war that ends him, and perhaps the whole of Israel along with it. Of course, the propaganda will continue nonetheless. Israel has attempted to make much of a hospital strike in Beersheba as proof of Iranian depravity, and the global mainstream media dutifully covered it to death. But ignoring the 3 hospitals Israel had already struck in Iran and allowing independent voices like mine to point them out. Well, that's not a good look for them, is it? Do support your favourite independent media, though. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.